and hopefully that is working. So, welcome to the Portal Mountain Development meeting live stream, and we are using a different piece of hardware because I forgot my power supply, and the sound wasn't working anyways. So we were going to be using laptop microphone, which probably sucks, but we'll get through it. It's notes. It's our casual development meeting in which we enjoy cheers and good times, discussing as we do on our voyage through the Portal Mountain mapscape, something like that. Yep. And so this series, I don't know if we're gonna ever wrap it up. This is part 7 or 8 now or something.
Four.
The Axiological conspiracy,
I think it's a 4 or 5.
maybe, but I think we'd probably be
It's
surprised.
been hammering out it all summer, basically.
Yep. And
So you want to tell us how far we got?
well, I think we keep starting over from the beginning, and then get instantly probably diffused. That's I'm just going to assume that's probably pretty accurate. But has it been just a week? Hasn't it? Was it last week?
Did you start streaming?
Yeah. Except on this laptop, you'd have.
You said it's a watch 10 seconds. Okay. All right, cool. Confirmation. That's nice.
Oh, it's
Thanks,
working.
Ian.
It's
now,
working.
now we know
Nice.
we're online. Awesome.
Can you hear us too? Be like nice to get the monitor going.
Yeah, but don't start a loop again.
No, 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 no. Me. My videos. Oh, cool. Thanks, Eon. Live. For some reason, live, it's not showing up for me. Oh, wait. What the heck? Oh, that's the botched thing. Whatever that is.
Okay.
So it says I'm live. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's the botched thing. Whatever that. Good. So yes, audio is actually working not bad. Right. So will we ever finish the axiological conspiracy? Weren't we getting into the brain chart?
Yeah.
We ended up developing the brain chart.
Well, explaining it, but yeah.
Yeah, borderline explaining.
Well,
Mostly
developing.
explaining would mean you have to like really take care to like imagine in your head what the listener is imagining and manipulate
Yeah,
the
but I don't
image.
have enough feedback other than you directly at the time that I'm doing it. So, but I did
Right.
try to take it step by step by step by step what everything is meant. So there's like that the loop.
Right. And we did maybe the bottom half, not
Yeah.
even almost. We got into Canvas and Transformer and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think we got a little bit lost in the weeds there because there is like small de deviation happening with that part of the chart. Like there's more things included, and you don't see that on the top part of the chart.
Right.
Like as you continue on for the
And
other
a
layers.
big point of that was that this is illustrating um, automatic processes that are sort of happening for you before you even become aware of them. They've already
Mhm.
been done for you. That's where we separated the top and the bottom half. In the top half, you start to see the conscious phenomenon.
Yeah, but you don't get that variation that you see at the bottom, that extra input.
Right. Yeah, we don't have to like watch some machine like juggle symbols. We have to sit there watching it do that. That's already done. Uh, well, but then we do, I guess. If we want to model what's going on, the brain chart allows us, helps us to. It just breaks out the stack,
Yeah,
the meme, the object, uh,
yeah,
or the
and
meme, the type, the object.
the main point of the chart is to demonstrate how there's signalic sort of input happening at each crossover between layers. Like anytime there's a mapping between two layers, that is another form of information that feeds back into the system.
Right. I figured out how to draw that better.
Cool.
The signal would be a ring on the outside that anything can just go to. The shape itself is a ring
Okay.
called signal.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, because then you don't have to wrap all the things around to come
Like a token ring.
back to one point, right? Yep. Does that tool work?
Hmm.
Um, and what was the? I don't know where that leads in the arc of the conspiracy, the axiological conspiracy, the conspiracy to obfuscate the meaning of value
So
as an arc.
it ties in because we're starting to tease apart like what's autonomous essentially and where like decisions get made. So that chart is like here's how it's all autonomous, right?
Right. Okay, I get your point. I
But
think.
it connects to like the say the affect chart in a specific spot, and the affect chart will then say, okay, this part of that automation is narrative building, right, all the way to the share, because this ends at object, the concrete, as far as layers go. This takes it farther and adds the effective element,
Yeah.
and then the pleasure pain, all of that gets to
Isn't
become the
isn't
reward
that
and punishment.
interesting how the affect portion, like you said, setting up narratives, but narratives are in a shared layer phenomenon. And this is a thing happening with artifacts shuffling around before they even, I
Yeah.
guess, memify or come alive, be executed.
Yeah, and to understand, like, but and if you want to understand that, that's where you get the big chart with the dream and everything to do with that. That goes into that detail as to like what the side of what the affect chart is showing on the one side.
Yeah. I thought it was just interesting that narratives being constructed already before they're even presented and like pushed up in the DOS
Right,
stack, right?
right. Like you don't think, for example,
It's like the artifacts are built out of narratives, or they're like already shaped like a stories or something.
memes. The meme is the running element. Artifact builds up the minplex, but the minplex is the thing that's running.
Right. Yeah, it's neat because we break down the neurochemical operating system into um, like was it like abstract, concrete, shared, mimetic being at the bottom.
Hmm.
Um,
It's all in the it's all in these charts kind of like detail what the mechanisms and interactions are modeled.
right. Yeah.
So that's how that's why it makes it difficult to bring everything into one chart because like yeah, it's really using the same elements, but now those elements are like reconfigured totally different.
Right. And so this artifact landscape, um, we're not able to help or affect what comes to us, but we can shape the field over time intentionally, right? Through feedback.
Yeah. By is basically the insertion of further and further artifacts. If you remember back in the day, the statements we were making is that you can't just undo stuff in your mind. You have to install the model as yet another tool to progress it. So
Right.
it's like you're inserting an artifact into the flow deliberately, and that's what ritual would be, and that kind of.
Interesting. Like how a memory can't really be forgotten truly, like experience that your mind has. If it was this, especially whether it was traumatic or not, it's still a part of that. It's part of who you are going forward. your
Right, right.
collection of all of your experiences, even the ones that never would stand out to you, that have just kind of raised the
Yeah, they would
signal,
still
raised the
linger there.
signal a little bit, even
Yeah.
though you could never maybe pick it out. But it's still there. It
Or it's
doesn't.
never like a signal on its own. It's always tied with some other signals, which is what would be the normal case actually.
Right.
It's like part of the thinking, of course, is that you only know that something is there by the way it affects other things around it, right? Not you can't truly observe a particle. You have to see how it affects other particles or some other shit
Right.
on the screen. Crap analogy, but somewhat gets the point across.
Yeah. It's a horizon.
For sure.
Hmm.
So yeah, that ties into the dream chart. The dream chart has a moment chart. All of that, of course, can tie easily into the ontological matrix chart. What's in the dream?
Right. And so now the point of all this in the context of uh, the axiological conspiracy,
Yeah,
which is
conspiracy is the
which is
obfuscation.
nobody's fault in particular. It's no group or class of people who are doing it,
Right.
etc.
It's like if you were to take what the ontological matrix is presenting, it's the full thing is what's conspiring to keep things chugging a certain way
Right.
as a whole. But it's not like, but nobody owns it or nobody's like in charge of it in particular. There's people
Right.
that are utilized by it for taking charge, but that's a different situation than the imagined one, the usual typical conspiracy one.
Yeah. Most approaches seem to be find the scapegoat, punish them, and everything will be better.
Yeah, well, there's that. But the image that I had, like, and why it's actually called the ontological matrix, is to kind of give that homage to the movie, since it portrayed regular people transforming into the agents of the system on the system's whim, right?
Mm, yeah.
So that's the connection I kind of like want to have there. That it's like it's not just like men in suits with sunglasses on indoors. It's your mom, it's your aunt, it's your brother, it's that's the system, and that's who the system utilizes to keep itself running the way it does. So if you want to go and blame and shame, all you're going to be doing is you're going to be attacking regular people for being regular people, and that's where we don't encourage any kind of thinking in that direction, right? Like there's no us and them in this particular conspiracy. It's
Yeah.
self-inflicted, but the only way to inflict it on the self is like if the whole thing works this way. This is where we tie in sound bites, we tie in the ego, and we create the agency, right? Which is what takes activity in the ontological matrix.
Hmm.
Sound bites mythology, sound bites ego. That's what the chart
Yeah.
is demonstrating.
It seems like just a pure ignorance. The reason why people depend solely on the market, can't respect anything else or understand anything else. Um,
That's by design. The obfuscation ensures that nobody thinks there's a different way.
right.
That if we were to like quantify this conspiracy, that's what it's doing. It's ensuring that the mythology that the market is the only way is the only mythology you're ever allowed to explicitly acknowledge. Everything else is your own form of entertainment. It's a club that you go to and jerk off in. mentally or physically. I don't care.
Uh-huh.
Lots of sexual references today. Sorry. Because really, the reason I have this sentiment and I'm probably just being mm, like less filtered today, I guess, is because all of this is mental masturbation essentially. So, what you gonna do? Even us, like what we're doing right now, we're making ourselves mentally feel good. But at the end of the day, you're gonna go home. I'm gonna go home. We're
Well,
gonna work
that's
our
what
work.
we said first thing off here to have some good cheers.
Yeah, I'm just acknowledging the fact. I'm not bitter, I
Yeah.
promise.
No, there's a sound of defeat in that. It's just this or it's just that. Like
Well,
we don't have the ability to classify or categorize certain behavior or whatever as emergent structures, right?
yeah.
We just do our part. Whatever we're doing is what we do, and we're not responsible for some collective emergence or any other cultural social
At
thing.
least not in the sense of authority or like don't tell people what to do in the first place. So it's not like what it's not like what would emerge would emerge as a an extension of our own will or something to that effect.
Yeah,
I mean, if it does,
yeah.
it's only
It's
because
a
it lines up with the will of other people.
it's a
It's
hobby,
not.
really.
Yeah.
So far, anyways, we can make more of it if we want, but it's a hobby,
Yeah.
and I find human organization and behavior and all that interesting. So I want to know more about it. So
Hmm.
this is how I do it in conversation, right? That's how I learn
Hmm.
more about it, discuss.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But yeah, there are some certain long-standing questions that I've tried to find answers for a long time. Some of them being like, how do you pinpoint the origin of where did things go very wrong
so
to a
I
pivot point of history?
so that's like asking what's the source, and you know me and source and my allergic towards it.
Yep.
So rather than thinking of an origin point, maybe I would suggest to you to think in terms of what's called a perfect storm. So like you have a whole bunch of events that individually do not e- cause anything to emerge, right? They just keep happening, nothing comes out of it. However, if you take a certain combination of these events, put them in a certain sequence with a certain like uh, inbound outbound sort of interplay, basically turning it into a feedback loop is what I'm getting at. Um, if you have that perfect storm of events, you have that emergence, and that could be called an origin. Now imagine a bunch of perfect storms popping up and down, and eventually they
Yeah,
perfect storm together.
this is fine. I'm okay with that.
So, like, if you want to look, think about origin, think about a gradual evolutionary sort of mutation that eventually, like, you can't see what it's doing like at the beginning. It's only when it's all put together that you see the effect.
Yeah.
This is what I suspect gives a lot of people the false notion of some intelligent design. It looks like it's intelligent after the fact, but it exists because it works, not because it's. Hmm, I'm just blabbing.
Yep. So that's all I meant by origin point is some sort of meta myth or pseudo history to just
Yeah.
give an idea of the understanding mythologically who we are or where we came from. That way we can know, what's our past, what's our future.
Well, what I just described as this perfect storm of events. right? Situation, it's smack on the medium of animism that we've discussed before. So the stacking and the protocols and all of that jazz, right? So we see that same phenomena within the subjective stacking in the big diagram, for example, the mountaintops that we've discussed as an analogy for it. If you were to recall the big chart, it has a series of concentric
Yeah,
circles
at
at
the
the top.
top.
So that's meant to represent like a mountain range actually, rather
Yeah,
than a single hill. And and it's like a subjectivity stack. Um, so this sort of stacking and emerging up of many stacks and then like perfect storming together to combine into something, that's happening in almost every single layer
yeah,
of our discussion. So that's what we need to keep in mind. And so your origin story also falls into that sort of um, isomorphic exposition. It happened because it can, basically. Now, the perfect storm for the pseudo history that we have, and let's remember, pseudo is the operative term.
uh-huh.
It's not the history of mankind as is such, given to us by the archaeological record, like completely. We are using that to inform a generic, more universal arc that you can find happening in different ways in different places, eventually perfect storming together into one global society as we have known, as we call civilization. Anyway, like, so the whole origin story for the pseudo history is the opening up of the fields, right? So the ice age recedes. Humans already know how to do agriculture. Humans already know how to do drugs, and they come into contact with vast majority of grasslands that have been purposed for those things. So the prehistoric human didn't have like necessarily the need or the tools to deal with harsh climates or any of that stuff. Or no, sorry, I'm kind of mixing up my story here.
One big arc is turning sedentary instead of nomadic,
Yeah, yeah.
sitting in
Up
place.
up until that point, what the archaeological record does show is that even if we did cultivate, say, did some farming, it was always small scale and not the primary uh, thing that people relied on for sustenance, and that's because of seasonal changes. With the grasslands, that became less of an issue, especially towards, once they figured out how to use these large fields. There would have been a period of like, okay, what do we do with this? And eventually, gradually, another perfect storm happened, and the feast economy was born. Another perfect storm, somebody tried to steal some shit, armies were raised. You know what I'm trying to get at? Like, there would have been like a tit for tat sort of give and take, and more tech, more this,
Yeah,
more and
probably
more and
lots of
more and more.
different clusters of
More artifacts, basically, is what I'm
uh,
getting at.
different ways that different cities work, not cities, but tribes. Some have more of this, some have more of that, some are more warlike, some are more peaceful, whatever.
Yeah, in general, you only see you you we only find, not only, but we generally find like this mass graves where an incident would have happened where a mass grave was necessary. Because the peaceful times, people die peacefully. They're like, whatever happens to them is like spread out everywhere. You don't find much evidence of like the peaceful living, which you will find a mass grave because it's like, it sticks out like a fucking sore thumb. And us being us, we're like, oh, we must have been this violent all the way back then.
Sure, yeah.
But notice how you don't have uh, the whole earth peppered with just mass graves. It's only like one incident there, one incident here. So violence, yeah, happened even back then, but it wasn't like the way of life. Imagine having to spend that much energy, not even knowing if the injuries you'd receive will let you survive after the fact, and like making that your daily routine or something. Like what? Medicine wasn't back. It was even worse back then. Well,
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm just that is an assumption. I'm just saying, look, the you spend your whole entire life to just what throw yourself at some pointy stick. I mean, we do that now, but back then, you know, what for exactly? You don't start seeing any of the sacrifices en masse until you see civilization. You don't see mass violence until you see civilization. It all is rooted in there. The warlike situation, incidentally, connects to ego
I
and
like
our
this
local.
idea of like civilization and like a counter civilization kind of energy, like like unions and that kind of stuff. Um, like how the workers have tried to make it things basically reform, right? That's what we call
Yeah.
it. The counter
So
energy is always there. So with
yeah, but this is commodified.
but
This is the system selling itself
it
back.
always does. That's a recuperation.
Yeah.
The
So
system
long as
wants
we,
to draw from
yeah,
the best sources.
it recuperates that drive, is what I think I'm trying to say. The drive is there, and we see it resonating through things like forming unions and whatnot. But because the unions are systemic to begin with, we also have another. We end up adding one more layer to the same in-out
Yeah,
schema.
just part it's part of it. It makes it more palatable. You don't
For
feel
sure.
like so much of a slave because, well, you can fight back against the man, and you're
Which is itself work, but yeah.
sure.
How do you want to spend your leisure time? Working for the man, fighting the man,
So
selling the man?
yeah, the fact of it being precuperated, um, in other words, anybody even setting up the system realizes that you set this tension up, set the tension up, and then let the people grind away at it.
Hmm.
Um, but does it begs the question of, well, what about like civilization to begin with? Like, do we have to keep? Does it have to keep being the way, like market based commodification of life? Does it have to be that way? Is all we can do is just have a reform and make it a little bit better, right?
Well, you can only make so many reforms until you hit the revolution stage. And the revolution stage doesn't have necessarily needs to be like a violent revolution, but if you have too many of those, the war emerges. To take it low to go lower in the ego stacking.
Right. Yeah.
So you can only reform, but reform is just like one stack giving itself another layer and another layer and another layer. Eventually, it becomes very authoritarian and it's under its own rule sets. That's the image I'm going with.
Right.
That's
Like you're talking about revolution
yeah, like and
when something is supposed to change, quote
it's too
unquote, but
big.
really it's
So you have
you
look at
could
it.
say it's the puppet master behind the scene who actually controls the stack or whatever group controls the stack, switching in another stack that it controls for another that it controls, kind
No,
of
like
stuff.
if no, the image I'm going for the reforms keeps building the stack like vertically, I guess. In just imagine it. Like
Reforms, yeah.
I'm just trying to give directionality, velocity, and all that kind of stuff so you can picture it. So reform will like grow the stack, right? But the strife within the stack continues. There's this group versus that group. That's what we're reforming for to like separate. tease out all of the different antagonisms, if you will. Now, it's big, and you have like the antagonism. So why not just split the stack entirely and have the antagonistic thing separate the whole? That's the revolution. That's more than a reform. The stack is
Yeah, but
split in two.
one stack gets destroyed because they war, don't
So it
they?
starts off with like let's say equal footing in the most idealistic scenario.
Okay.
There's which doesn't exist. But for the purposes of just imagining the diagram, the archetypical structure of it is what I'm trying to get at. So the stack splits, like obviously here it splits into two, but this could be split into all of the different factions that have been warring with reforming with each other to begin with. So you have now more like a horizontal um, distribution of many stacks. So now we've split. That's what's revolution, like that split that is it supposed to indicate. It sets out the stage for war. How at some point they'll send the lowest parts to duke out whose version of the reform, the initial reform, is supposed to take over. And that's what we're kind of seeing with like politics, essentially.
Ah.
Like that's the model I'm trying to use to capture the phenomena. I'm not saying like this is the perfect explanation for political strife
It feels
based
like
on like current
when
politics.
you say
It's
revolution,
just more like no, revolution is a separation,
but
so us versus them.
it feels like the revolution is when after they're already separated, one stack takes over is the new boss.
Well,
That's what usually people think.
revolution
There's a new boss, not
revolution
just
is the
the
medium.
boss split into two.
So if you think about these as mediums, reform is a medium to keep the stack together, revolution is to split the stack, and then war is to take over. They're all mediums through which exchange of information takes place, if you will.
Hmm.
So that's the framework I'm trying to set up to work through. Um, the reason for the framework is not to like discuss politics or war or revolutions or reform, but to discuss the stacking of ego and what acceleration mean. What is the acceleration towards the bottom? That's the war part. That's that's what it's meant to model like. And then the other
Yeah.
part of it is like how is the ego stack affected? And that's when you see the system on the one side giving rewards and punishment to each layer of the stack. All of these things are meant to now show what's happening inside the ontological matrix. We went through a bunch of charts from the brain to
Yeah.
affect, then we went through dream, the big chart, and that presented us with the ontological matrix. And now in the ontological matrix, we see ego wars.
Damn.
So many different things are connected. The obfuscation keeps it all together and tethered to it. So you can't leave.
So it's one of those things where the medicine being simply to understand the problem. When you understand it, that's the medicine.
It falls apart. It's
All it
like
is a model to identify this.
you've heard this said about ego too. Like if you will try to understand the ego, it will resist. The feeling is that it resists, but then once you see it for what it is, it has no power. You've heard that language, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get
It's
at.
very similar to that.
One of
It's
those.
it's it's on the same. It's isomorphic with that. At least the point here is to not just say, "Oh, there's an ego you got to look at," but like, what is an ego? What the fuck is ego doing?
Yeah,
Like, what context do you even find
and
egos?
then according to our pseudo history, um, we can we can look at how our economies used to function. They were more based in gift, and there often was no market except maybe trade across against tribes that you don't know well or strangers, outsiders you
Right,
can trade fine.
tributes,
But
tributes and trade.
your
Yeah,
culture and society by and large is gift economy based. Um, and then you've got the fields open up, the wheat, the alcohol. You've got Um, what I like to call it, it's a surplus of reward,
Yeah, yeah, and
right?
a delay in consequence.
That's, I guess, maybe that's one and the same,
No, it is. It's two sides of that one coin that doesn't really have a term for
right? Interesting.
the increase of reward. So reward, right?
Increase reward. Yeah.
Or your access to reward. The workflow can change from I'm working, I'm rewarded, I'm working, I'm rewarded, I'm working, I'm rewarded to I'm rewarded, I don't feel like working. I'm rewarded, I don't feel like working. You know, so that
Uh-huh.
so I mean that's like the go-to argument for why people are homeless these days. But that's not the dog whistle I'm getting at actually. The dog. This is a situation where you have people collecting that surplus and then people sitting on said surplus, and those are not necessarily the same people. And as time moves on, it's probably going to be not the same people, most definitely. Um, because
Well,
management becomes more efficient, people get more sophisticated
here,
roles. It becomes more pointed. Um,
when we introduce conceit with affect, we get a pleasure turn becomes greed,
right.
right?
The thought, medium to seek.
So it's this is the perfect storm as you've got all this grain, and
Right.
people love it for making alcohol, and they don't have to do much. You can just have
The,
grain.
the grain is right there. It does it most of it for them.
Um, yeah,
And when we say grain, let's be clear. We're talking about poppies. We're talking about weed. We're talking about
yeah,
anything that grows like in a corn,
field,
anything that grows in the field that becomes like collectible en masse, and you can store it after the
right?
fact. So grain is just like our go-to
Yeah, so
word
you've got
because it's
this
easy.
perfect storm, all this drugs sitting there, which by themselves, based by virtue of what they are,
Invite.
feel like a reward. It feels it's pleasure, right?
Yeah, you've introduced way more artifacts of pleasure than nature you would normally supply.
Right. So this is part of the perfect storm. You introduce conceit, which wasn't didn't there was no need really for conceit.
And if there was, it would flash and disappear because again, the rest of the world does not need it either. Right? Like it's not
And
evolutionary advantageous without that delay.
this sort of perfect storm pile of reward, surplus of reward. It could be a motivation for a tribe to become more like
To protect it
to
for one.
protect it and to have slaves working it or whatever to capture people to work it.
Mhm. And to spread. The other thing that civilization tends to fucking do is it exhausts the resources and then uh, grabs another chunk out of nature.
Right.
So that also means that people with fields were in fact in danger from other people with fields.
So the
Eventually, essentially, is what I would say actually.
you either kill or be killed. You have a field and grow your power, or you get run over. Period. The
That,
only things that are left are people, warring tribes who warlord hold over fields.
and
Um,
this is where when we
so
see the birth of
this seems
civilization.
like a logical thing, birth of civilization, origin point, and all this. This is where we would point to our affect chart and be like, see what happened here?
Like the right side of it still existed pre-civilization, but it would have been like a benign.
You mean
To
the right side?
Yeah, it would have been benign, right? It wouldn't even be a tumor. It would just be helpful, informative, like run away from the tiger kind of thing.
Yeah,
But now it's like completely
it's automation.
converted.
It's supposed to do automation, but
But now it's been converted into this mythology that doesn't sustain nature. It sustains production instead.
right. And so this is where I would want to point anybody who is thinking about politics, or like, oh, my side just has to win and then the world will be fixed, or we just need a revolution, or this country needs to take over that one. Like, does your worldview at all address what happened to us in this pseudo history? Because if it doesn't, we're just going to keep doing what you don't like.
Right. And I think that this is the point you're trying to interject in conversation where it's not even like on the radar.
It's invisible.
Yeah.
It's
And
freaking
and
invisible.
when you do that, it's like, okay, I've only heard rhetoric like that from the other side of the
Yeah,
thing I'm against.
yeah,
So it the two can't the association is automatic because that's the only people that actually are vocal about it.
right. Or even you could use an in-group
And
heuristic, like they didn't say what my people say. What I always talk about, they didn't talk about that. Therefore, they must be somehow obfuscating or like, but they're on the other side.
yeah,
They're just hiding it or something.
and there is fairness to that, but you and I want to make sure
It's automation.
and I want to make sure that we're
It's
not
handy.
actually saying what those people on the other side are saying. I know that's vague, but um, we are not motivated. We are not motivated by the same things as what you would hear from either side necessarily. Our motivation is quite personal. It's not political in nature, and the motivation is to present the model. Now, when you present the model, it tends to step on the feet of the running narratives, and the running narratives respond as if it's an enemy from the other side.
Yeah, huh?
And that's where we are. And that's okay.
That does happen
That's okay.
sometimes. Yeah.
That's okay. The issue that a lot of people have is that the rhetoric also contains what's called dog whistling. And dog whistling are hidden phrases that are said one way, but you're supposed to know what is really meant by it. Um, so here's a dog whistle. The word degenerate. When you put it into a speech, try to put it into like, okay, there's a morality, there's a this, there's a that, and
It
who
automatically.
people who don't follow those kinds of civilized principles are degenerate and they are harming us and they are this and that. But degenerate is really a dog whistle for either Jew or, them, the other, the cabal, the people who are at the same time subhuman, but somehow have all the power of humanity at the same time. It's just this weird contradiction of clusterfucks.
Okay.
The way how, say, black people are presented as physically almost superior in their rhetoric, which is why we need to fear them, and then at the same time they're morally inferior because of their culture. Like you've heard this rhetoric before. I'm not saying those things. I'm talking about the fact that these things are said for anybody who's listening. Like so, like it's the Jews. They're always painted as subhuman and the richest people on the planet for some reason. You have this dichotomy of they're better than us and they're worse than us at the same time, like often in one sentence. It's 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 quite fascinating to listen to sometimes.
Yeah.
Like in the fascinating like a train wreck, not not ooh shiny.
For me, when you're labeling somebody like, say, degenerate, you brought up, it's
I don't use the label
it's
personally. I That's a label that people use.
yeah. Um, I
Like
forget
it's a
what I was gonna say.
I'm just saying, like usually when you hear that person, there's often why it's a dog whistle because it's often meant for a specific audience, and that audience almost universally has one thing in common.
Well, it's a
They have
talking point.
they
It's a
have
shared talking point.
they have this image of a master race, whether whether they say it explicitly or not,
That's a typical one, yeah.
they imagine a kind of human, the most civilized human, the Ubermonk, if you will, whatever archetypical scene you want to have, and it doesn't have to be race specific. And it's it could be it's usually race specific, but it's not necessarily race specific.
Uh-huh.
And what passes for race these days is even more even more of a clusterfuck.
Right, the like fascist vibes of worshiping a
Yeah,
certain ideal form, that the ideal form of human, which then you have a category to say these are the subhumans.
right. It's like with red pillars, with the alpha and the beta. They're doing the same thing. It's the same fascist tones. Which is why
Right.
most of them you find to be fascist to begin with. The thinking applies to so many of these fields so readily, right? Which is this is why you find clusters of people in they're a redneck, they're they're a Trumper, they're a red pillar, and they're a fascist all at the same time, like almost like guaranteed, especially if they use the dog whistles, because that's how they communicate. The with that's their language effectively. It's like you know what I really meant. We can't say it out loud because we sound like fucking degenerates, if you will, ourselves. So therefore, we shall hide in plain sight, which
Yeah,
is
with
not too far from what I've been suggesting for the guild, but for a
some words.
different reason. Um, it's actually a similar reason. The world will definitely be less accepting of the extreme violence that fascism is actually suggesting, so it hides in plain sight. But the world is also not very accepting of let's not use commodification as the source of our everything. The, the system is allergic to both. One, because it eliminates its customer base either way. So unfortunately, we have to also hire in plain sight as well.
Yeah.
But we don't. And I suppose, like, you can argue that our whole grandmaster conversation appeals to the whole Ubermonk thing. Um, but I don't think the process of what that entails matches it at all. We're not talking about an authoritative
Well,
figure
the
to begin
ideal
with,
the ideal isn't of a specific race or
or a specific
eye
human type,
color.
or a specific superhuman or anything like that. Grandmaster is not like the authoritative figure to be looked up to from that perspective. The best me that I can be. Like it's a personal, um, I guess, self-help more like situation. If you also not my favorite cup of tea, but
Term.
yeah, it's like, we're not trying to be self-help, but it's closer to it than it would be to a dictator sort of figure. And the other thing is that the role reversal that mastery entails does not at all match what's suggested by, let's say, the far right sort of Ubermonk situation. In particular, the more on the mastery you are, the more subservient you become, right? Like the entire point of mastery
Yeah.
would be to be more in
Resonant.
tune
Yeah.
with the demands and be the supplier. So it's a reversed relationship altogether as far as the market is concerned. You don't work for the man and then he gives you scraps. It's the other way around. The scraps come up, bubble up, and the masters deal with them. So there is similarity in structure, I'll admit to that, and it has to do with the fact that hierarchies are hierarchies and they tend to layer upwards in complexity.
Not to mention that the normal temperament, devotional temperament, tends to function through like role model.
Yeah,
Like there,
and it's easy to confuse the two situations.
The the
especially when
having of a role model and who that role model is, what they do, what they look like, how they behave. That's how you teach a system to somebody.
yeah,
Most people understand that this is watch him, he's
as
doing it
opposed to some
perfectly.
magical guru who goes into a closed room with all these girls to have sex with them behind,
Right.
which is what happens in the non-model way. And that's where you
Also,
have that. That's where you have the whole authoritative structure that people also shun, and also lo and behold, it looks exactly like fucking fascism to begin with. Like those structures, like church structures, look like fascism. They're all sort of really ripe for the uptake of it. And I'm not talking about like historical fascism that we have to deal with right now. I'm talking about the concept, like the far, the so far right that it's beyond the right, right? Because with with a traditional right, if you will, the mythology is consistent with the whole. So both the right and the left at least subscribe to the same mythological concepts of the church or whatever, the particular government or the kingdom and the parliament, and which was what France went through. Like,
mm,
it didn't really go through it very well, but you know things happened. But that's not the point.
some people did some things.
The point is that fascism is it's like its own breed of right because they actually take a mythology that no one else actually really supported, and they paint it as the good old glory days from which we degenerated into, which is why nobody knows about it. So they kind of like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you
Yeah.
will. So that's the biggest difference between like right and extreme right. Extreme right is like here's a completely new mythology for you. Accept it or die. Oh, by the way, our mythology makes you die anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, it's a very self-serving um, style of being in the right, not
So
the wrong right, but the left right.
I don't want to be a bummer, but probably could take a break. And also, we're kind of wandering on topic. We started out pretty strong. We just keep kind of wandering,
Well,
rambling, and I keep getting thoughts to make sure we're on a track to like maybe complete the
I have a kind of a summary I can
conspiracy
give you
thing.
about that. All those different interactions of ego. So your revolution, your reform, your war, accelerationism, reward and punishment that bleeds from affect and dream and all of that stuff. All of these things, perfect storming together, if you will, give us a picture of how the obfuscation is happening. So instead of it being about, like the holons involved, it's this ego takes up this agency to run through this soundbite in this matrix, part of the matrix, right? Like it's going to be like, okay, so what are those activities? Well, most of them are, you know, kind of like they don't eating, sleeping, farting, shitting, whatever. But what we do care about is the points of reform between egos. We care about the points of, sorry, reform is up and down. We care about points of revolution. Those are the obfuscation points. They're like, it's not about the whole on, it's about the progress of the system. It's not about, changing that matrix over and over and over
Yeah,
again. That's the obfuscation. The obfuscation is you're neglected, this isn't. You're neglected, this isn't. That's kind of what I've been trying to say. Now I'm giving it a picture where the neglect is happening. So this is like the longer we figure tinker with like separating the egos this way, that way, the other way, we're neglecting the actual thing that runs the whole fucking program.
all
Anyway,
right.
I'm getting excited here. So the conspiracy is to keep that going, and to keep this neglected. To do that, you obfuscate the model that connects all of these dots together so that you don't catch on to the, because then if you catch on, you're less inclined. If you're less inclined, advertisement doesn't work on you.
Yeah.
That's the generic thinking pattern I have about this. So obfuscation wise, conspiracy wise, it's the market's conspiracy for you to neglect your own self. Maturity, if you will, and maturity being defined by growing in the model, understanding these things, mastering over these things. Mastery over these things is especially not welcomed by the system.
Right. Then you become unpredictable,
Well, to it.
not as useful.
You defy their balance sheets, and if you defy their balance sheets, they're going to find a way to balance you in anyway. That's where you get the whole bottom tier being criminal. Because at the end of the day, if you disengage entirely from the system, it's going to connect you to criminal. If not, if you don't do it yourself, it'll do it for you. You know, set up a situation in which you have no choice but to break the law, and then, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Simple, simple, simple.
Take the cheese.
And you know, it all does sound complicated and deep and whatever, but it really isn't supposed to. Because I'm pretty sure that like half of what I said was just like hidden through intuition alone, even if the entire context is not that clear. And
Yeah.
and the other half, it's like, I mean, you could take it as some kind of dog whistling, but I don't know. I'm not aware of who I'd be repeating if that's the case.
Well, any interpretation like that is subject to conversation. So whatever.
Yeah, like I mean, I
Unfortunately.
would hope that at least some of the rapport comes through as well. So yeah, we'll talk about race, but not like which race is better. Just the fact that people do that. We'll talk about sexism, not because we want to engage, but because it happens. It should go without saying, but it's unfortunate that it doesn't.
Yeah. I think we have a lot of things on the go. Kind of could wrap into a lot of things.
So yeah, I guess that would wrap up what the conspiracy is with this final image, because what else is there to like really?
I want to keep going just a little bit. Compare with like say I don't know what it's the reform angle or the revolution angle within the system.
Okay,
So people present that as a viable like
it's a contingency.
this
It's a
is
band-aid.
going to make things better. It's going to be better. We're not going to fix it all, but it's going to be better. And I don't agree with that. Like I don't think that's even worth. It's not worth pursuing something on it. It might be better after once after everyone's dead or whatever. Um, so, so we have
Well,
to like come back to this origin point and be like
you can't be a deer frozen in
there
the
doesn't
headlights.
there doesn't we don't need to like
Do you know what I
get all
mean?
our comrades together and go to city hall and like start taking over the government like that. I don't understand that, but what we can do is start working and communicating more closely with our friends and family to ask and see who needs what, or do people need things, or like what's going on everybody, and to start building these networks with the institution, right?
Yeah,
um,
which amounts to reclaiming the gift economy.
yeah, so this can be done for free. You don't have to overthrow or kill anybody.
Well,
Anybody can start doing it.
for free is an interesting term. You need the membrane of the trade guild. You need a conversion point of from currency to gift. So
Well,
to
what
to
I
to
meant,
to get the item from the outer world, you still have to have go through the currency translation, you still get a commodity out of it, and then once it's inside the institution, it becomes a gift that can be freely exchanged.
well, that's assuming the gift is outside to begin with. Maybe
Oh, yeah, but
you
like
already have it.
even if you're
That's what I
creating,
meant by we are free to
sure,
participate in this.
but like you're going to have to freely go out of the network to obtain the material for the network to
Well,
be
we
able
already
to.
do that. A bunch of stubs.
No, of course
Yeah,
it's
of
ideal.
course we have